In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace your backing shield. This will apply to the 2008 to 2010 Ford F-250. Let's get started. Let's remove the wheel. If you have one of these covers that covers up your lug nuts, take a pry bar or screwdriver. They make a little slot here that you can use to pry it off. Remove it. Now use a 21mm socket and remove all 8 of your lug nuts. And take the wheel off. With your 21mm socket, remove the 2 large bolts that hold this caliper and bracket assembly onto the axle tube. Leave one threaded in partially so it holds the caliper while you take off the bottom one. Okay, take the caliper, move it out of the way. Just make sure that you don't pull and put pressure on this brake hose because it will get damaged internally. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it around here and hang it on the shock. And now you can remove your rotor. Mine isn't stuck on here. If yours is, it could be 2 things. One, it could be stuck on the hub of the axle here. In that case, you'd want to hammer it till it comes off. The second possibility could even be both at the same time. Could be the e-brake shoes are too far out, they are over adjusted, and they are basically keeping this rotor stuck on here until you de-adjust them, which I will show you how to do in a second. What's actually happening for me is one of the retainers for the shoes is broken. The shoe is actually pulling away from the backing plate and it's jamming itself into the rotor, so. Okay, take this off. And to get to the adjuster, you would pop off that little rubber boot there. And from the back side, you will be able to see this adjuster right here. You'd use a screwdriver, a little pry bar, whatever you have, and spin it to loosen up the tension on the e-brake shoes, and that will allow you to get the rotor off further. In order to minimize the dust that goes up in the air, I'm going to clean everything with brake parts cleaner. Next, I'd like to take a wire brush to the hub, just clean up the surface a little bit. It is dirty, but it's not rusted, rotted, corroded, or in really bad condition. So a wire brush should do the trick. If you have to sand it down, go for it. Just be very careful. You don't want to remove material and make it uneven. You want to use a very soft sanding disc or whatever you might have to clean it. But you do want a nice even surface so that the rotor can sit nice and flush on it without causing any sort of brake vibrations or other issues. Try to focus also around this inner ring here where the rotor sits. A lot of times that's where it'll seize up, build up rust, and make things not sit correctly. Degrease it. Let's remove tension off of the adjuster on the e-brake shoes so we can get them out of here. Now I'm going to take a pick and try to hook onto this spring here and just remove it from where it's seated into the shoe. Try to pry it out with a screwdriver so I can get my pick in here. There we go. Now you can pry the top of this out. Just like this. That'll remove tension off of the spring. Flip it up. Obviously, it's supposed to be connected. This one is no longer connected. Get the spring out of here. There's one of them. And now for this shoe over here. This one's also supposed to have a clip. That is missing as well. So we will just get this out of here by prying it up and out. Get this bottom spring out of here. Looks like it's seized onto the e-brake lever here. So we'll get this out of here. There we go. Take this out. Now use your 18mm socket and remove all the bolts that hold the axle shaft onto the hub. Make sure you have a collection bucket underneath to catch the fluid. Give the axle a tap with a hammer to break it free. Or just use a little pry bar. Pull the axle straight out. And there you have it. Set it aside safely. At this point, you need this special tool here. You need to basically match up these little pins with the 4 holes in your locking ring for the hub. That just seated in there. And now with this tool in here, the driver's side will actually be reverse threaded, so you have to go right to loosen and you'll have to go left to tighten. And that is because most of the time the wheel is going to spin forward, and Ford designed it so that as the vehicle's moving, it is obviously less likely for that ring to spin by itself and loosen up. You would not want that to happen. So it's reverse threaded. It's going to make ratcheting noises the whole way around. Just remove it. Okay. Now that this is out, I'm actually going to start it back in a few threads so that I can prevent this hub from flying out, because now we'll need to pry it from the backside and pop it loose. Grab a large pry bar, the larger the better, so you can have an easier time. Stick it right in between here and the studs that bolt on your backing plate and backing shield. And this is why I removed the brake shoes, e-brake shoes, so that I can actually pry up against this and not on the e-brake shoes. There you go. Stick your tool back in, loosen this up. Get this out of here, and now you can pull the hub straight off. Make sure the bearings don't go flying. There it is. Grab a pry bar, just tap the seal out of here. Okay, take this off and throw it away. I'd like to clean this whole area with some brake parts cleaner because I don't want debris getting into the axle tube. And obviously try not to spray this inside of your axle tube, just clean out the outside. Wipe it off. Now we have to remove the e-brake cable from this lever. You could try to pop it off of here, but I'm actually going to take the e-brake cable out of this bracket, remove it. Once I twist it, I can easily remove it from over here. The idea is to pry the spring back. And with the spring pried back, hopefully I can slide in my parking brake lever tool. One end on my tool is too small, the other one is too large, so what I'm actually going to do is use it like this, and with it in that position, I can just take a pry bar and squeeze the tabs in. Could use pliers also. There we go. Now you can let go of this. Pull the cable straight out and push it to the side. Now I have to pry the spring back a little bit and try to push it away to release tension off of this so I can have room to twist this around. I'm going to use some locking pliers right on here. All right, so now from the back side, you can see the you can see 3. The fourth one's up here. 24mm bolts that hold on the backing plate and the backing shield. So let's go ahead and take these out. There it is. Now we just have to separate the shield from the plate. To do that, I put mine on the ground so I can have a sturdy surface to hammer against, and I want to punch out these studs. They get pressed in to the backing plate and it clamps the shield in here. So take your hammer. If you're afraid you're going to miss, you might want to put the nut back on. If not, just hammer the end of it. For these bottom two, I'm going to use a socket as a spacer / receiving cup. Take your hammer, tap it out from the middle. This ring here is what holds the backing shield onto the plate. Okay, this is what's left of it. Get this boot out of here, save it, just in case you don't have a new one, although the new shield should come with a new boot. Next, you want to clean up this surface. Mine isn't too bad, so I'm just going to lightly clean it up with a worn sanding pad, but you do whatever you have to do to get it nice and flat and clean so the new backing plate has a good surface to mount on. Now I want to coat everything in some anti-seize, that way it doesn't rust. So apply a thin layer all around. Now I'm going to slide this on all the way. And now with this installed over here, take the backing shield, line it up. I'm going to go ahead and put these bolts or the studs through. That way I make sure everything is lined up. And with all that lined up, I'm going to take a hammer and just tap the backing shield into this inner part here. Tap the studs through as well. Put the nuts back on. Now let's go ahead and tighten these up. I'm going to use my air gun and bottom them out until the nuts stop moving. What that's going to do is it's going to press the studs through the backing plate, clamp the shield onto it, and make sure that it's nice and tight. I'm going to go in a cross pattern. That way I make sure that everything gets seated properly. And now with everything bottomed out, I'm going to use my breaker bar and pull on it by hand to make sure that it actually is nice and tight. That one's good. Oh. That one has a little bit more in it. Okay, that one's good. And that one, perfect. Since I'm here installing the backing plate, I'm going to go ahead and put the rubber boot on. That goes right here for the parking brake adjuster. I took it out of the old one, just slide it right back into the new one. Now let's put this boot back in here. What I did is I put a little bit of grease on the end, that way not only will it seat easier, but it will also seal up a lot better. Perfect. And put your e-brake lever in there too. Ours is not frozen. If yours is, you'd go ahead and put it in a vise and then tap it with a hammer back and forth until it unseizes. Slide it through all the way. Take the parking brake cable, hook it in here. Okay, there we go. Straighten it out. Now you can let go of the locking pliers. Now you can pull this spring back. slide this in here. Okay, make sure it goes through. Doesn't want to come back out, so that's perfect. That means it's locked in. Now we have our hub on my workbench here, and I want to use a screwdriver, go in between the seal and the hub, and break it free, spread it apart so I can pop it out the rest of the way. Okay, there it is. Try not to get too much debris in there. There's the rest of your seal. If you think you need to, you can go ahead and clean up the ridge here where the old seal was. I just cleaned it up with a rag. Mine was pretty clean. Now take your seal, slide it over like this, and all we have to do now is tap it straight in. Be careful, don't tap on the center part. This is a two-piece seal, and you also don't want to tap just on one edge and just smash it down, because obviously you will ruin it that way. You can definitely hear how the sound changed there. That means it's bottomed out completely. I did not damage the inner portion of it. It still spins. Everything is perfect. That's exactly what you want. Now take your hub, slide it over, press it on as much as you can. And the rest of the way, we'll have to use that nut in the center and tighten it up. Before we do that, obviously we have to put the outer bearing in. Slide that in place. I put a little bit of oil on these threads here. And at this point, what I want to do is line up that tab with the cutout on the axle tube. That's the only way this will fit on. And once you start it by hand, make sure the threads don't cross thread, of course, that would be pretty bad. Then take your special tool, and we're just going to start tightening. And we want to basically over tighten it at first, because we want to press this hub and the seal all the way in and seat it, and then we'll back it off and readjust the torque. Okay, I'll get you a side view, that way you can see exactly how much this is being pressed on. And now, let's just go ahead and tighten it up. Give it a few spins every now and then. Okay, it's getting a little tighter. That's normal. Obviously, we're not going to leave it like this. That's pretty snug. Give it a few spins to make sure that it's seated. Okay, now back it off. That spins very easily, obviously too easy at this point, but I'm going to continue backing it off and spinning it to make sure that everything is seated. We'll tighten it back one more time. Give it a couple spins. Okay, back it off again. And at this point, see, now it spins freely, and I'm just going to keep tightening until it spins with very slight amount of pressure on it. That's a little too much. Right about there, I think, is good. That feels perfect to me. Obviously, this is a situation where you have to only go by feel. It has to feel loose enough to spin freely, not too loose, and obviously, if it can't spin more than one rotation by itself, that is way too tight. At this point, you can take your axle and slide it straight in. Try to support it, don't just drag it along the axle tube as you slide it in. And as soon as it gets to the inside of the differential there, you might need to lift it up and down or even spin it so that the splines can line up. Okay, so right there. Oh, there we go. All right. Lift it up, press it on, and there you have it. Let's bolt it up. Start all these by hand, that way there's no way they can cross thread. Now we're going to go ahead and bottom these out, and I'm going to do that in a cross pattern, that way everything seats properly. Then I'm going to torque them in the same pattern. If you have a Dana rear end, you're going to torque these to 98 foot-pounds. If you have a Ford rear end, you're going to torque them to 108. In my case, I happen to have a Ford rear end, so I'm going to go to 108 foot-pounds. To prevent this from spinning while I torque, I'm going to use this pry bar and just hold the hub from spinning. Just going to double check them all. All right, now it's time to reinstall the parking brake shoes. As you can see, this is my old adjuster. It is not seized whatsoever. It still operates properly, but I do have a new one, so I'm going to install this one. If your original adjuster is seized and you want to reuse it, go ahead and soak it in some rust penetrant, work it back and forth, maybe with some pliers, apply heat if needed, break it free, and then I'll show you how to lubricate this regardless of which one you're using, if you have a new one or an old one. So again, regardless of what you're using, I like to apply some grease to it. Don't apply too much. I have a little bit too much here, but I'll go ahead and wipe it off in a little bit. But what I want to do is basically just coat these threads. With the threads coated, I'm going to go ahead and put on this little star adjuster. I'm going to drive it all the way down. This will do two things. One, it'll wipe off the grease for me so I don't have to do it by hand. And two, it'll work the grease into the threads of the adjuster or the little star wheel. Okay, once you get to the end, try to wipe off the excess here, and I'm actually just going to put it right back on the bottom, because the rest of these threads actually slide in to the hollow part of the adjuster that has no threading on it, and that would be this right here. So slide it down. This works perfectly. Work the grease around in there, and now this is ready to go. So let's put the shoes on. However, before we get the shoes on, I want to put a little bit of grease on these raised areas of the backing plate. That's where the shoes are going to sit. And you want to grease it up just a little bit so that it doesn't rub on the backing plate dry. You want it to be slightly lubricated. I'm going to add some to this parking brake lever as well, and right up here where the shoes actually sit. Now it's time to put the parking brake shoes back, and you want to make sure that you have them facing the right way. So what you're looking for is the small cutout versus the larger cutout. The larger cutout goes on the bottom. The small cutout goes on the top, because the little tiny cutout actually fits right into the groove on the e-brake lever. So slide it on here, make sure it's positioned sort of where it's supposed to be. It's not going to sit perfectly until we actually clamp it down. And to clamp it down, get your pin, slide it through the backing plate, make it go through the shoe in the hole that it has cut out here. And then you can take your spring, and you'll notice how it's bent and curved, kind of like a hook. I found that it's easiest if you slide it up like this, and then you just take it and press it and basically curve it around the pin, and that's it. Then you want to lift the shoe a little bit. I'm also going to put this yellow spring in, hook it into the shoe on that side, and then we'll have to line it up with the shoe on this side. Okay, there we go. It's easiest to put it in now, otherwise you'll have a lot of trouble to line it up later. Now we just have to get the top of this shoe over the retainer here. So I'm going to take a pry bar and use that to kind of help this along. Okay. So what you're looking for is for this shoe to seat into that adjuster right there. Once that's done, you can easily press it up against the backing plate, slide the pin in, and hook it onto the backing plate. Okay, that's in position now. The only thing left is the adjuster and the spring at the bottom. To get this lower spring in, I'm going to go ahead and hook it onto the shoe on one side, and then I'm just going to try to use some needle nose locking pliers to kind of bring it over into the other groove on the other shoe. This is pretty difficult to show you because even I can barely see. There you go. This spring is not very strong, so you can easily stretch it out and then just pry it into place, especially since the adjuster isn't there. So now what we have to do is put the adjuster in. All you have to do that is stretch the pads out, which again, the spring isn't very tough, so easily doable. Okay, there you have it. Make sure everything is situated properly. Give this a couple taps back and forth to seat it correctly and center it up, even though we will do that again once the rotor is on. But for now, make sure everything is secure, which it is. At this point, I want to take some anti-seize and cover the surface of this hub, and that is because I don't want any rust building up here in the future, and this will also ensure that the rotor doesn't freeze up here when the next time comes that this needs to be removed. So go ahead and put a thin layer across the whole hub surface, especially around this inner ridge here where the rotor actually sits up against. And you want to make sure that you don't get it on the lug studs as much as possible. If you do, go ahead and wipe it off. Go ahead and coat this whole surface, and then we'll install the rotor. Go ahead and install your rotor. Now to adjust the parking brake shoes here, it's going to be a little bit difficult, especially if the truck is in park. You'd want to put it in neutral. You want to give this a spin. Now I can hear minimal friction here, so I'm actually just going to leave them like this because they are perfect. The little amount of wiggle that I have gives me some friction noises. Listen closely. What you can hear there is the e-brake shoes kind of just barely touching the hat of the rotor here, and that's what you want. You don't want any drag on them. I can spin this easily, and you don't want them to not touch at all. You want them to be very close, which these are. Now if you did need to adjust them, you could do it in two ways, either from the back side where that little rubber plug is, or if you have a lot to adjust, it might just be more efficient to take the rotor back off, move the star adjuster at the bottom, put the rotor on, and recheck. Again, mine are good, so I'm just going to leave them as is. Now take your caliper, slide it on, and let's bolt it up with the two mounting bolts. I had one ready because this is pretty heavy, so I want to secure it here. Go ahead and put in the top one. We'll bottom these two out, and then the torque is 203 foot-pounds for these. Now get the wheel back on, put on all 8 of your lug nuts, bottom them out, and then we'll torque them to 165 foot-pounds. And if you have your lug nut cover, don't forget about that. Now one last thing before everything is finalized, you remember I said we have to tip the differential at the end. What that means is since we worked on the driver's side, I'm going to jack up the passenger side and let the fluid drip towards the driver's side wheel. That will basically immerse the bearings in gear oil, and that's how you ensure that they are properly lubricated. So I'm going to jack it up a few more inches, and then I'm going to just let it sit like this for about 10 minutes, and that way I know the bearings are good and everything is ready to go. Once this is done, we can drop it down, check the fluid, and go on our way. It's been about 10 minutes. Let's lower it down. Now, since I lost very little fluid and I know it was full beforehand, and if yours was full, there really shouldn't be much of a need to check it and top it off. It will still be full. We did not lose much at all. But if you think you need to add some, that is the fill and check plug right there. Use a 3/8 ratchet and remove it, fill it up if necessary. Make sure you're on flat level ground, and then cap it off and take it for a road test.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.